folks, and welcome to the show. My name is Asa Morris, and this is Strangeness. I hope you are all doing well, despite the world around you. I hope you are healthy, happy, and safe. I am on your side, and I am rooting for you. You've got this. Before we get going, let's do the business. Make sure you are following us on all the socials, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok mostly, and of course our YouTube, where every week I host a paranormal news rundown show called Weird Week. And it'd be in your best interest to watch it. Sub to the channel and do all the algorithm feeding stuff. You know the deal. Also, our Patreon. We have all kinds of tiers and cool options, so if you like what we do and want to help us out, that would be great. I mentioned it last week on Weird Week. Subscribe to our YouTube. But I wanted to let you know that with last month's Patreon money, I bought some necessary equipment for future projects. So just know that your help really helps, and I thank you so much for that. Anyway, all of our links are available in the show notes or at linktree/lowstrangeness, and that's the business. So let's go, because we are certainly diving into some very bizarre territory today. The title of this episode may be a little obtuse, because I feel like Disney probably has a lawsuit bot that scours the internet for literally any possible reference to their properties. And to be honest, a lawsuit, pretty good press. So let's just say it. Today's episode, Under the Sea, is about mermaids. Seriously. Honestly, it's not a topic I ever took seriously or found interesting at all because of how just plain goofy the idea of it is. However, of course, there is a however here. Once I got down this little rabbit hole, I started to realize that the only reason I felt that way is probably because of Disney, and probably because of the image that comes to mind when I say mermaid. You know, beautiful woman on top, big old fish butt. It's legitimately ridiculous, and you'd be right to think so, if that was actually what people were seeing. But you guessed it, because we're talking about it, it's not. This whole journey began as I was perusing Reddit a while ago, a few months ago. I don't know, time has lost all meaning. I was doing research on the Throw Alien posts and came across another similar post. This one came from someone who apparently worked for the NOAA, that's the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, so think water NASA, who claimed that they had discovered a race of mermaids. Now, I am going to read you their initial post, as I usually do, but let me be totally clear on this. This post is widely considered to be a LARP, or to put it in layman's terms, bullshit. And it may be. I'm not going to argue its validity one way or the other, because after getting waist deep into some of the other material I found, I began to look at this post a little more favorably. Again, this may be a case of people hearing mermaid and dismissing it outright simply because of the popular image we are all familiar with, or it may be a case of internet fiction. The user did initially provide a lot of identifying and verifiable personal information, and I mean a lot. There is very little question to this being a real person. They also posted where they worked, where they got their education, etc. Not a smart move on the internet. However, they did state that they were not as savvy to it as most, and that they were new to Reddit in general and didn't know the rules. The post was removed because so much identifiable information was posted. However, it has been archived with that info redacted. So there are a couple moments where I will say redacted, and that is because the Reddit mods deleted that info, though it was initially available. So here we go. Here is their post, originally titled, "I work for NOAA, Mermaids Are Real." The Navy has worked in conjunction with the government to keep this quiet on all fronts. Other governments have similar systems in place to keep this information strictly in the realm of fiction, according to public perception. I am compelled to break my silence and disseminate this information. My colleagues and the organization I've called home for the past 12 years is responsible for keeping one of the greatest genealogical discoveries of all time quiet. The sector I work in is being restructured and downsized, so I'm going to lose my job in May. This post should expedite that process. I began my career with the Redacted office located in Redacted. I held an MS in Biological Sciences from Redacted and a PhD in Wildlife and Fishery Science from Redacted. Again, Asa popping in here to remind you that all of this redacted information was initially present and verifiable. Okay, back to the post. In 2012, there was an incident of a few beached whales that were investigated by NOAA and a team from the Navy. This was very thoroughly hushed up immediately afterwards. The whales were full of perfectly circular incisions where large chunks of their flesh had been removed, like cylinders of meat, essentially. At first we thought this had been done after the beaching, but we learned that they washed up that way. What really caught everyone's attention was the seared flesh around the circumference of the incisions as if they were burned out with lasers. We were all baffled, as we'd never seen anything like this on marine life. Then we got a call informing us that a small team would be conducting a hydrographic survey of the area using the echo sounder of a local vessel. We typically use a technique called multi-beam sonar to scan and map the seafloor in astounding detail. The datum we collect is processed by various parties and is usually uploaded to online databases. We were told that this would not be the case for this expedition. Long story short, we found irrefutable evidence of an advanced humanoid species living under our oceans. Using the multi-beam sonar, we found their dwelling areas and also what appeared to be underwater vehicles of some kind. The creatures themselves were tracked by the Navy over the course of 2 weeks using a submersible equipped with special deep-sea observation equipment. The creatures displayed speeds of 70+ knots, faster than the sailfish, which is widely considered to be the fastest creature in the ocean. They also were recorded emitting sounds that resemble marine communications, and instruments also captured the emissions of precision sonar blasts that damaged the hull of the submersible, according to the Navy report. There is footage of the creatures, including juveniles. The Navy did not share the video with us, but an officer I spoke with gave the following description. They didn't look real. They looked like computer animation or something. They have a glow around their entire body and they move really fast. Like even small movements like turning their head or moving an arm was like watching a high frame rate video. They look nothing like any fictional depiction out there. They do not have a fishtail. They are completely humanoid, but extremely thin and tall. Their bodies were covered in a material resembling elemental mercury that looked like it was moving. They were very interested in the submersible and seemed to know they were being observed, as a few times they would swim off and come back with more creatures. We observed at max 5 of them at once, varying sizes but otherwise identical in appearance. Their eyes were completely white and there was no visible hair nor any features that implied male or female. No visible ears, and the mouths were wide and lipless. We flashed sequences of lights at them, sounds, and even extended a robotic arm on the submersible to try and get some kind of physical sample or DNA from the specimens or the water nearest to them. We don't know how they were swimming, as they weren't wading or moving their bodies the way a fish or even a human would need to underwater. They were capable of just moving rapidly in any direction without the need to change positions or swim. In fact, during the majority of the observations, they are just floating motionless without losing or gaining buoyancy. Alright, Asa popping in here one more time. I want you to picture that because it took me a minute to really wrap my head around what was being described. Picture something long, skinny, humanoid wearing a reflective silver coating floating under the water. Now, you're probably imagining it lightly bobbing, but imagine it not bobbing at all, literally motionless. And now, in an instant, able to dart away without changing position. This is why he describes them as being like CGI. The physics of it make no sense. However, if you've been paying attention to the UAP news over the last couple of years, you'll know that this is also how the Tic Tac crafts are often described. Motionless, almost like CG, and able to essentially jump to a new position at will. On top of that, we have footage of UAPs diving under the sea, and official reports of them darting along under the water faster than we can even come close to achieving. And that's not even to mention some of the more fringed, though respectable, notions of underwater habitations recently. Do you see why I'm looking at this a little more favorably? Anyway, back to the user's post. Now, there were also craft observed via sonar, some very large. They would move faster than anything should be capable of moving underwater. They were not seen or recorded on video, just on sonar. They would at times disappear completely while being observed, as if they left the water or cloaked themselves. We have 2 weeks worth of data on just this one area. We were made aware that this is one of many spots around the world where these creatures reside hidden from view. A briefing that I was able to read during a meeting indicated that the Marianas Trench is where the largest concentration of these creatures reside, and that they seem to be completely unaffected by the depths. Structures believed to be their dwelling units have been mapped. They are perfectly hexagonal and joined together like a honeycomb. Their composition is unknown. The Navy confiscated most of the hard evidence. All we have are some sonar readings that are only anomalous if you know what you're looking for. I want everyone to know this information. We are not alone, but they aren't from outer space. In order to exist at these depths and under astronomical pressures, these beings are either invincible or they have evolved so far beyond us that they have some kind of technology that negates both of those dangers. This is actively being covered up by every lettered organization and by our military. Other nations are aware of these beings, and I believe some authentic videos may even be mingled in all of the doctored stuff. The sightings in Kiryat Yam were authentic. We mapped a collection of their dwellings off the coast near Cypress Island. That's the end of the initial post. The poster did include multiple screenshots showing locations and seafloor mapping of the areas they were claiming were inhabited, but I'll be honest, I have no idea what I'm looking at. It's just satellite imagery to me. The poster also mentioned that they believed the Kiryat Yam video was real, and I wasn't sure what that was, so obviously I looked it up. It's got to be the fakest looking shit I've ever seen. On top of that, its origins are a little murky. Apparently Animal Planet used it as promotional material to advertise 2 shows about mermaids, and I'm always a little more than skeptical when I learn cash has been involved. A couple last thoughts on this post before we take a break and I get into some international and historical accounts. According to the naval officer, according to the poster, the creatures didn't have fishtails, which contradicts what is shown in the Kiryat Yam video, as well as literally every other report I've seen. That, however, isn't to say that it negates the whole story. As I mentioned before, there are some parallels to the current UAP situation. We very well could just be describing 2 separate things. Lots of things could live in the sea. In the end, do I think it's a LARP? Maybe. But like I said, there was a lot of personal information initially attached to the post. I don't think it should be outright dismissed, and I certainly wouldn't be surprised if some future generation of people just accepted it as everyday knowledge. Especially when considering the parallels to the current UAP situation. Anyway, we are going to take a quick break here, and when we come back, we'll be diving into a few historical and international accounts. Sit tight. We'll be right back. Alright folks, welcome back. So, quick catch up, slow mustard. I love that joke and I'm going to keep using it. A potential whistleblower, potential fraud from the NOAA claims mermaids are real, gives very specific info and claims the Navy, the NOAA, and everyone else is covering it up. It resembles the UAP situation and does not really in any way resemble what we imagine mermaids to actually be. So where does that leave us? Well, it leaves us with about a couple thousand years worth of people being drop dead horrified when they spot an actual half fish, half human thing zipping along through the water or catching some rays on an otherwise empty beach. So, let's Carmen Sandiego this subject and spin that globe because mermaid sightings are all over the place. First up, the Ningen of Antarctica. I'm sure you saw this coming, but we've got to talk about it. Now, people commonly associate the Ningen with living near Japan, but that is primarily because it was apparently Japanese research vessels near Antarctica that initially spotted, cataloged, and reported the creatures, according to a Japanese paranormal magazine that first popularized the creatures. Ningen are apparently human-like and are white in color. They are discussed as having the lower half of a fish or fins on their bodies, while other descriptions of them say they have hind legs that enable them to walk on land, but notably no arms, a reverse mermaid. And besides eyes and a mouth, they apparently have no other facial features, which also kind of is similar to the first story. Size reports differ between average human size and even so far as 90 feet long. Now, obviously, this reeks of bullshit, especially with the wide array of variability within that lore. There are a number of alleged photos of Ningen online. Some seem more realistic than others, but most Ningen photos are generally considered to be artistic interpretations. Apparently, they are most often seen at night and are therefore difficult to photograph. Of all the human-fish hybrid crypto-humanoid stories, this one to me is the least believable. Though I should also say, regarding the description of these fellas and looking at the alleged photos, they're not something I would want to run into, ever. Seriously, Google it. Ooh. Spinning that globe, we now dive into the Caspian Sea, the world's largest lake. Lying between Europe and Asia, we are primarily focused on the southern coast. Here is a clip from an excellent YouTube channel that I highly recommend called Mysterious Middle East, which I have been a fan of for quite a while now, wherein they describe a small handful of the Caspian Sea run-ins with aquatic humanoids, which they refer to as the Runan Shah.
An anomalous entity known as Runan Shah, a large humanoid sea cryptid that has been seen by many sailors and oil rig workers across the region. When sightings of Runan Shah have occurred, witnesses say that this entity turns the water around it crystal clear, while typically being accompanied by a large shoal of fish. Sightings of this terrifying anomalous entity have placed it both in the water and on the land. In March 2005, the Iranian newspaper Zindagi published an eyewitness account from the crew of the Baku, an Azeri traveler based in the Caspian Sea. In the interview, its captain, Jafar Gasanov, stated that the creature was swimming on a parallel course near the boat for a long time. He said, "At the beginning, we thought it was a big fish. But then we spotted hair on the head of the monster, and his fins looked pretty strange. The front part of his body was equipped with arms." Shortly after the publication of his interview, a number of extremely detailed descriptions of the creature were reported from a variety of different sources, most of which have been corroborated with each other, making it unlikely that all of the stories are fictional. All eyewitness accounts provide a similar description of a humanoid creature, roughly 5.5 feet in height, a muscular build, webbed fingers and feet, and black and green hair on its head. Its nose is shaped like a dolphin's beak. It has an extremely large mouth and a missing chin. While unfortunately, no photographic evidence of this particular creature can be found online, other videos and photographs claiming to be of mermaids from the Caspian Sea are available. However, how authentic these photos and videos are highly questionable, if not entirely fake.
Now, to be clear, the Caspian Sea sightings did not start in 2005. A year prior, a fisherman reported another. In 2002, an Iranian businessman and his guest on a yacht apparently spotted 2 of them. On the north end of the lake, the Russian end, in the 1980s, a number of oil rig workers reported the same creatures not only in the water, but also attacking small groups of people near the water. In 1928, another sighting took place in a nearby lake on the Russian side. The Caspian Sea is home to a number of anomalies, including a couple of sunken ancient cities, and apparently an indestructible shark, and of course, myriad UFO sightings. To me, the Caspian Sea Runin Shah are among the more believable tales, considering how often they are reported and how similar those reports tend to be from all over the lake, which again is massive. All right, let's take one last spin around the globe, and we're going to finish up with Alaska. Okay, so remember when we were talking about the Animal Planet promotional video that the NOAA person believed was real? Well, that led me down a tertiary rabbit hole, leading me to a History Channel show called Missing in Alaska, Vicious Arctic Mermaid. Now, to be totally honest, I don't buy a goddamn thing that comes out of the History Channel anymore. I think those shows are a great way to get people hooked on various aspects of paranormal phenomena, like mermaids, for example. But as someone who has spent a number of years at this point looking deeply into these things and attempting to pull real-world, mundane explanations and really attempting to explore and validate these things, often through the lens of complete skepticism, I find the History Channel no more useful than 3 a.m. back porch weed conversation. It's so entirely sensationalized and cherry-picked that it is, to be generous, useless. And more often than not, damaging. For example, the Ancient Aliens nonsense. That show has done immeasurable damage to that concept. But anyway, while that show led me there, I of course began to fact check it, and that led me to Inuit descriptions of mermaids, specifically the Qualupaluk. What's interesting to me about the Qualupaluk is how similar the description is to that of the Caspian Sea mermaid or the Runin Shah. Dark, long hair, greenish skin, long fingernails or claws, and apparently a little bit of a bastard, also like the Runin Shah. They were also described as occasionally having fins on their heads or back, like the Ningen, and having webbed hands and feet. According to the Inuit legends, the Qualupaluk wears a sort of parka with a pocket on the back to hold the children that have wandered off that they steal and drag under the water, or back to a cave in some legends. Now clearly this sounds like a story to tell your kids to keep them from drowning. If you remember, last season I covered a number of indigenous American folklore, and a good handful of it was associated with keeping children in line. And that could be what's happening here. However, there are apparently people, adults, still sighting a similar creature to this day near the Arctic. In fact, as far as respectable accounts go, the explorer Henry Hudson reported what really can only be described as a mermaid. He writes, "One of our company looking overboard saw a mermaid, and calling up some of the company to see her, one more came up, and she was then close to the ship's side, looking earnestly on the men. Soon afterward, a sea came and overturned her. Her back and breasts were like a woman's, her body as big as one of us, her skin very white, and long black hair hanging down behind. In her going down, they saw her tail like the tail of a porpoise, and speckled like mackerel. Their names that saw her were Thomas Hills and Robert Rayner." So popularly, we learn growing up that manatees, sea cows were the reason for all of these mermaid tales, right? But Henry Hudson's Arctic Area Report pretty much throws that out the window. There's only two explanations: it's real or it's not. Not a lot of room for misinterpretation there. All over the globe, we have these strange, unconnected tales. Some of the creatures described similarly, some not. Some vicious, some not. But all continue to be discussed and cited and reported and ridiculed. Is there a humanoid presence under the water? Are there civilizations on this planet beside our own? Are there organizations that are actively hiding it? To all of those questions, we can only really say, maybe. And that's our show. Thank you so much for hanging out, for joining me, whether again or for the first time. The music underneath the segments was provided by the excellent Iron Cthulhu Apocalypse, whose links will also be in the show notes. Make sure you're following us on all the socials. Currently, I am most active on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. And also make sure you're subbed to our YouTube for our weekly paranormal news show, Weird Week, where every Monday I give a quick rundown of a handful of the events that happened that week that caught my eye, as well as a handful of other series I've been working on. So make sure you check that out, give us a sub. Lastly, before I go, I am slowly attempting to build a loose collective of people within the paranormal entertainment field, like myself, where we can support and cross-promote each other. So I would like to get your attention on two other creators that I've had the pleasure of meeting in internet terms and sort of working with. First, I mention them on YouTube all the time, and I want to mention them here, the Graveyard Goons. Think Spooky Jerky Boys. Is that a reference people still get? Anyway, prank calls, spooky themes, great times. Secondly, I want to recommend to you the podcast of Mystery and the host Jason Rigdon in general. Jason puts on an excellent show with fascinating guests, myself included very soon, and it's well worth your time. All of their links will be in the show notes. But that's that. My name is Asa Morris, and this, of course, is Low Strangeness. Thank you again for joining us. Take care of yourselves and the people around you. Be safe out there, and I'll see you in 2 weeks.